as an immigrant, as a woman, as a minority. Their stories. I get laughed at a lot as a kid. Learning the word water. I didn't know a word of English. Water. My classmates, they start laughing. It's like a lot of times we're very stuck in our own assumptions. Yes, there's great inequity and injustice in the world, but I think most people don't wake up to say, I want to be a terrible person. And people are complicated. You try not to make assumptions, but you try to have this open mind and say, oh, what matters here? What doesn't? Self-awareness can be gained by reflection, but it can also be gained by engaging with others who are different, because then we know what really is important. When you're engaging with that, you're also getting a deeper sense of yourself.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Where Boundaries Dissolves podcast, the place to become more self expressed and healed. Because I believe that the more expressed and healed that we become, the more we can live and lead from a place of authenticity and purpose. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by someone who embodies that philosophy, Sanyin, a Thinkers 50 coaching legend. So she coaches CEOs, she advises CEOs. She's a board and tech advisor, Duke professor, and leader at Duke University's Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center. Sanyin has inspired leaders from all walks of life, and I am truly lucky enough to connect with her through a friend, Carol, who's a Duke alum, also a podcast listener, and just someone who seems to know the most inspiring people. So, Sanyin, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, Helena, it's a joy to be here.
I'm at an interesting crossroads, and I say this in my life because I feel it's very pertinent to what we're talking about. Having recently re-emerged into my career after healing what I now realize was a broken heart, not a broken heart in the romantic sense, but in a professional one.
Mm.
For years, I felt the sting of inequity as I tried to climb the corporate ladder, only to wrestle with the realization with how much of my integrity I felt like had to be sacrificed along the way to climb this corporate ladder. I exited the corporate realm with more faith and hope going into entrepreneurship, hoping that being in a field where I could have more impact directly working with people that I chose, only to find that it wasn't entirely too different. And despite my best efforts, I felt like the world was just an unjust place. And in order to reach to what we feel and define is success in society, we have to leave a part of us on the road and behind that integrity that I was talking about. I feel like as women, and I'd be very curious to learn if this applies to other marginalized groups as well, we are taught to lean in, to work harder, to take on more responsibility in a system that wasn't built for us. So we find ourselves playing this fair game and overly invested in this game when the space that we're operating in is not fair. So I wanted to talk to you today, Sanyin. You've often spoken about how we can convince ourselves that maybe we don't belong in leadership, that maybe this isn't our world, that maybe we need to sacrifice ourselves. Like I have convinced myself that maybe some part of me has to change and adapt, and I can't show up fully authentically to play this game. So I'd love to learn from your perspective what it means to have the courage to face inequity, to have the courage to tell ourselves and convince ourselves that we do actually belong in leadership. And the reason I say this is because you have a very inspiring newsletter that comes out on a regular basis, and this was one of the topics. I wanted to dive into that so the women and people listening to this podcast can find energy and motivation to keep going, to keep moving forward, even when the system feels unjust.
Mm.
So let's start right there. Like, what inspired that blog post? Is that something that you coach aspiring CEOs that they do, in fact, to a certain extent, have to convince themselves that they do belong in leadership, especially when the system is unjust and they face a lot of barriers and inequities?
So there are so many questions in what you had shared, and thank you for your authenticity Helena and vulnerability. I was recently moderating a panel last Friday, and it had an amazing friend, Charles Randolph Wright, who is African American director, playwright, one of the most revered playwright producers, directors across Broadway, across television that we have today. And Charles shared an insight, and it's been in my mind ever since. He said, the truth is always a hit. So think about that. The truth is always a hit. Now let's connect that back to this idea of how do we maintain our integrity and our values and who we are? I believe we have to, right? But one is we have to be aware of what we value and who we are and what's our purpose and what is really important to us. So
Hmm.
you step back as an example, what's really important to us. I remember writing my obituary several years ago because I was working on a bio for a board and I felt so disassociated from the person that I was writing about in that bio. But the words that came to my mind were she wasn't always brave, but she made others braver because she believed in them. Or she minded moments big and small. She helped people see how they mattered. And that became more about the person who I choose to become, right? What's on my last day? Imagine my last day on earth. What do I want people to say about me? And that became a guidepost for me for how I choose to live and who I want to bring into my life and where I want to invest time in, right? Now, if you're trying to please everyone, you're you're going to have to be someone you're not. And you're going to be competing against others who can be 100% them. So imagine that. If you're devoting energy to being someone you're not devoting energy to bringing your fullest contributions of your original you to the table. So the thing is, you're not trying to please everyone, you're trying to find the audience. In marketing, let's look at luxury goods. Not everyone is going to buy, say, a $5,000 handbag, but the company that sells the $5,000 handbag is trying to find specifically the audience that would find the value of $5,000 in that handbag, right? It's the same thing. Not every organization is going to be the right fit for us and who we are in our superpowers. We want to find the organization or the people for whom we can that can see our value, or they may not yet see it, but they're open to seeing it, and then we're creating something wonderful together. So one, you have to know who you are and who you're not. You have to understand what your superpowers are. I had a hard time seeing what's special about me. I could see what's special about everyone. But my new superpowers work, that blog, is really about all right, how do we help discover our own? We need others' help. But now we also have a responsibility to help others discover their unique contribution, to help them see them just as we're longing to be seen, right? One, know who you are and who you're not. Two, find the people who value who you are. The world is full of terrible things and injustices, yes, but then I've also witnessed justice and equity as well. Both exist. It's about matter of degrees, and then try to help there be more equity. And then part of that is being able to see when it is being um, done and be able to highlight that. Throughout my career as an immigrant, as a woman, as a minority, there are stories, yes, but then I've also had the great blessings to have amazing mentors along the way who opened doors for me. I'm like, yes, they did that for me. I know what it felt like. I'm going to open doors for others, right?
Hmm.
And if we take the time to notice, we'll see it. And so let's see it, let's highlight it, and then let's try to be that for others. There's a lot of good happening as well in a world where it feels like in the news. It's just one terrible thing after another. But there's so much good. There's so much good. So find your
Hmm.
people. And then three, on adapting, there is a bit of adapting because our assumptions could be wrong. So we go into a place, you know what your values are, like integrity. You believe people are the most important, more important than anything else. You believe in kindness and in caring for your people. Okay, you do that. How you exercise that may be different from different organization to organization. There's this thing that's called the golden rule: treat others as how you want to be treated. But there's an adaptation because there's an even better rule that's called the platinum rule: treat others how they choose to be treated,
Hmm.
because they have different experiences. So how they feel seen may be different than how we feel seen. Take the time to learn them, understand them, and understand what's important to them. And that's where the adaptation comes in.
I love that. I love that when my guests, like literally in the first answer, that feels like they just cover the full spectrum of what I wanted to go in. I love that. It's very interesting because, you said at first know your superpowers, then find the people who value them. I feel a lot of us struggle to like even like we're kind of aware of our superpowers, but then it takes an extra step to acknowledge them, to advocate for them, to the point where we can even find the people. If you don't see yourself, like other people cannot acknowledge that, right? If you're not like standing up for your superpowers and you're like, yes, I actually am really good at this thing, like what is it about, I mean, especially women, where that is so hard.
I would like to challenge that a little bit because
Okay.
I had a hard time seeing my superpowers. But then I started asking mentors what they are. And
Mm,
so for example, I wanted to be known as smart, brilliant, smart. And the thing that came very easily is connecting people. Like,
mhm,
oh, well, you're doing this. Well, you know this person. You both should connect. And I didn't realize that was an incredibly valuable superpower because it came easily, right? But it wasn't until I asked friends and mentors, what is it that I bring to the table? And they highlighted that. I thought, huh, I didn't think that was valuable. I thought everyone could do that too. I didn't realize that what I was doing was different. And I think that's one of the key ahas from the superpowers work is we don't see our superpowers clearly, but it can be obvious to other people. And so in the conversation with other people, you get to see what they highlight. Now, different people may highlight different things, but it's that dynamic of who you're working with. Where are they? And they just don't tell you because they think it's so obvious. Of course you would know it. Just as we walk around and you're like I'm like, oh wow, it's so obvious how Helena set this up, her vulnerability, and then the way that she frames up the question. That's different, but it's obvious to her. It must be obvious to her, so I don't have to tell you about it. But that's
mm,
the trap we all fall into. So I
hmm.
love making a habit of when I see someone doing something that I think, wow, that's different, or wow, that's something I wish I could do, right? Because that's usually when you know it's something extraordinary. Then, and to tell them, because we don't do that enough. We rush and tell each other what each other's deficiencies are. We don't rush to tell each other what each other's extraordinary is.
Mhm, mhm,
But I do all throughout my life, I've had people champion me even when I didn't champion myself. We have to also believe in ourselves. And sometimes that can be hard, but we have to see it as a responsibility.
mhm. How has that worked for you in your career to then find those people who champion you, who see something in you? And how do you know, especially as people pleasers, right? We seek input from everybody.
hmm
S
I think seeking input from everyone is a good thing. It's pieces of data, right? So I think about stakeholders. I think about who do we influence? Who do we have to influence in order to make this thing happen, right? So it can be our boss. Oh, that's an important stakeholder. It can be our peers, and it can also be our direct reports. It can be our customers, right? To say, oh, how can we do better? And just to treat that feedback as data points. It's data points for how we become better, what we should do more of, what we should do less of, right? Then it becomes less emotional and more like, all right, what's true today doesn't have to be true 6 months from now. If I have the data for how I should change, then I can work on that change,
Hmm.
right? Um, I think it's also, I mean, I wrote a book called The Launch Book, not because I'm an expert on launch, because I'm the world's biggest scaredy cat when it comes to launches. And I
Me too.
procrastinate because when an idea is an idea in your head, it's a home run. But the moment you start, then you run into all these little obstacles and it becomes a lot harder. I started interviewing all these people on that mindset of launch. And what I discovered is just start. Just start and get data. You're like a scientist. You're like experimenting, you're changing, you're shifting. The end product might end up very different from what you originally thought, but you would learn so much along the way. So I'm a big believer in getting data points. So you're getting data points from customer all that, but now which data points are you going to place more weight on? Like, okay, so in this population, leukemia this. Well, why is that? Maybe it's the nature of the work. Whereas in this population, it's more this. But all throughout, it's you getting comfortable in being you. And part of that, I think, is also embracing all of our vulnerabilities and flaws, and that's okay too.
I honestly feel like in the way that so worked in male dominated environments for I want to say the majority of my career. And I've also found that actually those things that differentiate me, if I own them, then that's a
Mm.
good thing, right? Because you stand out. It makes you very unique. If you are comfortable with that, then you radiate just like a different type of energy and a different level of confidence.
And what makes you different is what makes you invaluable. The world, there can be four other, they think about a team. Think about a sports team, a women's soccer team, a men's basketball team. Your teammates can all be extraordinary, but none of them are extraordinary in the way that you're extraordinary. And collectively, you can take it all to the next level, right?
Mm. How do you stay connected to that? Because I feel like for me, it's I get there and it's when I feel very safe within myself, but we're experiencing very uncertain times. I also find myself pushing myself into more uncertain waters the older I get, just because there are more challenges and I've outgrown other situations and environments. But then I constantly come back to this notion of like, oh, okay, but every time I push myself into uncertainty, whether it's taking on a bigger project, taking on a bigger challenge in life, I'm disconnected from that confidence. I'm disconnected from that uniqueness. I come back into this fight or flight mode, right? Instead of staying in trust, instead of staying in hope, instead of staying having that faith. And it's this interesting balance where I'm like, because I'm also a fearful person. Like I just when I was 16, I told myself I was never going to travel the world when I saw my dad's Dia shows. I was never going to leave home. That was back in Switzerland. Now I'm living in the US. So I've constantly managed to face my fears and to overcome them. And I'm starting to learn that where my fear is probably where I need to go next. Um, but nonetheless, this is this constant dialogue that I have with myself is like, okay, I push myself into these new waters, feel overwhelmed. Oh my God. And then I'm like, this can't be healthy. This stress can't be healthy. Like, how do I deal with this overwhelm with more grace?
I think it's the with more grace part I want to double down on. So, one, can we just celebrate that you are brave and you recognize your fear and yet you still go towards it because you believe there's something that you can learn from it, right? You believe that it will stretch you. And when you're in the moment, it is hellish. You're scared, you doubt yourself. I just had one of those moments this weekend, and yes, it happens to all of us. But then it's in the afterwards that you reflect on and you're like, wait a minute, now I have another data point. I did that. Hey, you traveled. You're now living in a foreign country than the one that you grew up in. You're speaking a different language. You're doing a podcast in a different language than the native tongue that you
Well
grew up in,
well, it's
right?
actually my mother tongue. My mom is American, so there is some yeah.
Yeah, it's different. It's different, right?
Mhm.
And so this is the analogy I use. Yes, we all like lazy river experiences. You ride a little big tube and you float down the river, and that's nice. But we also, for some of us, we like to choose the roller coaster. And when you're in the middle of the roller coaster, it doesn't feel really good. You're like, oh my gosh, my stomach's like feet above my head right now. And then you drop and you're like, ah. But we chose to go on it. And then afterwards, we're like, that's so much fun. Let's go on it again, right? Now, I don't like roller coasters. I like the lazy river experience, literally. But when it comes to challenges, things that stretch my mind, I go for the roller coaster. And when you're in, you're like, why did I choose the roller coaster? Because it stretches us. It stretches us. So it's okay to feel. Get what the grace part is like in the middle of it. If it were easy, if we were comfortable, it wouldn't be as much fun. But we enjoy the surprises. And by the way, one of the surprises might be I didn't think I could ever do that.
Mm.
I didn't think I could ever be good with people. I was that super shy kid, Helena. I wanted to go home and read a book. I didn't think talking to people would be something I love. And I love it, right? Because I got stretched and I discovered I love that. I remember the first time they asked me to do a keynote. I thought, oh, can I do that? Am I a keynote person? I like facilitating and putting out conversations. Would I have anything interesting to say? But then you do it and you get feedback and you realize, okay, this also fits with my purpose. This is an expression of my purpose. There are ideas that people find interesting. So I can help people with sharing more of those ideas through keynotes, through podcasts. But this is not what I would have 10 years ago.
Question about that. Let's get really practical, right? What are the some of the practices to integrate our true selves? Because as I'm listening and honestly just reflecting on both of us and what we're saying, our true selves may lie on the other side of fear, right? We haven't explored it yet. We haven't experienced it yet. However, our brains can be really good at manipulating us and saying, well, no, that can't be us because I'm afraid of it. Like, why would I dare going there? What has been the thing that's given you courage? What's the thing you keep coming back to? What's the step? If we're spending a day in the life with Sanyin,
Mm.
how do you convince yourself to become a keynote speaker when you have also convinced yourself that you're a shy person and that's the label that you carry?
Isn't that interesting? The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and
Yeah.
can we change our minds about the stories? Can we change the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves? So, with that keynote, it was because a friend asked.
Mm.
And everybody has their different paths, right? So, all the listeners out there, they all have their different paths in different ways. But I know I am driven by one, it has to be meaningful and purposeful, right? Two, it was because a friend asked. And I didn't want to let this friend down because I don't like to let people down. If it were me sitting around saying, oh, maybe I'll go for a keynote, that would never happen, right? But once I commit to something, then I'm like, I cannot let them down. So I will do everything to make sure there's success on the other side of it, no matter how uncomfortable, how scary. We just have to just assume it has to be successful, and you do everything and you don't think about, and then you're not thinking about the fear. You're
Mhm.
just thinking focus on the mission and the success and
Mhm.
making sure you know you're not letting people down. That's just how I work. And then afterwards you get all these data points. You're like, oh wow, I learned a
Hmm.
lot. I learned something about myself. So instead of thinking about, hey, that's not me, think about, could there be other ways I can express being me?
Mhm.
See the difference? Like, okay, the story I'm telling myself is I'm a shy person, but giving a keynote is about, can I convey an idea in a way that can stick? I used to think that being inspiring was about being witty, being funny, being, I don't know, all these things. But then what I discovered was it's about putting the audience first. And that was very me. Like, I believe that the audience is the hero of every presentation, the reader is the hero of every book, and listeners out there, guess what? It's not Helena or I who are the heroes of this podcast. You're the heroes of this podcast. So part of what we're trying to do here is figure out how do we communicate and convey something that really connects with you there, right? That's
Mhm.
what that is. So, you know what? Interestingly, and I'm always watching keynote speakers and analyzing, like, oh, how am I feeling about when they do this or that? And then learn from that. So I took my daughter to a Taylor Swift concert. It was my
Mhm.
first Taylor Swift concert. And she's a Swiftie. And so I became a Swiftie, as in, I don't know her music. My daughter does, but I read all the interviews. I'm like, oh, I like Taylor Swift a lot. So we're at the concert. I know what I was doing because I didn't know the music. I was analyzing Taylor Swift, right? I'm like, wait a minute. She uses ohms and like and pauses, but we love it because she was speaking authentically. Believed in every word she was saying and singing. So we believed in every word she was saying and singing, right? And then two, she would give audience shout outs like, wait, you in the back, way up there, you don't think I can see you? The people in the seats with the lowest price tickets. I don't know if she can see them or not, but she gave them a shout out. So they felt seen. And then three, she did not have to do 30 songs. She could have done 20
Mhm.
and everybody would have loved her for it. But she went above and beyond for the audience and people felt that.
Mhm.
So those are the three takeaways I learned from Taylor Swift on how to be an incredible performer, keynote speaker.
Mhm. I love that. I think authenticity, coming back to our superpowers, right? It requires, I get this question a lot because my podcast is about authenticity. And it's like, well, what does authenticity mean to you, you know? And so I would like to ask you the same question. What does authenticity mean to you?
I can start with what it's not and what's often confused with. Authenticity is not saying everything that comes into your head. People think, well, that person is being authentic and they're saying something, and that something can be really, really mean. That's not authenticity. So it's not saying something without a filter, it's not laying out dirty laundry. But here's what authenticity, I know what the feel of authenticity is. I mean, I could see it in how you set up, Helena, this entire the conversation in the beginning when you were talking about, well, in corporate America, you felt this and then you didn't do this. And then so you decide to do this and you discover it was very much the same here in entrepreneurship. Therefore, you are grappling with this question. That was vulnerable and it was authentic, but it was also thoughtful because you were figuring out how to convey a point in a way that connects with something that your audience might also be struggling with, right? So, authenticity, I know the feeling when we're in it, we feel comfortable in our own skin. Like, I don't have anything to prove. I'm going to share something that I think might be helpful to the other person, whether it's a lesson from a failure or a lesson from a success. But I'm going to share it with the intention of being helpful rather than proving that I'm smart or important or I'm all these things. I'm going to be in the moment, listen to what you're asking, and share something in a way that we can connect with each other. You know, I've never been asked this question before. What does authenticity mean to you? But thinking through that, I think that's what it means. I think it has
I
to
love
be
it.
there's a sense of other person. Like doing a podcast,
Mhm.
Helena, is a lot of work. But you're doing this in a way that's, hey, it might help other people as you share your journey and as you're discovering your journey. And these answers might help other people too. Now, the other thing is it's also important too because there's quality And there's marketing. In
Mm.
business, a marketing department, there's also a quality assurance department, right? Both are important, but the realness, I think, has to be there. At least for me, it has to be there. It's how I choose to invest my time. For
Mhm.
you, I'm getting that sense as well.
To that point, I think I've done so much work on who am I authentically? What have I adopted and what what do I want to rework? What is that story that I've taken on just from society, from different figures, and then what have I wanted to change? And I think authenticity allows us to be relatable as we're figuring that
Yeah,
out.
it has to be a two-person.
Mhm.
It's about connecting. Like the entire superpowers, the underlying thing is this idea of with
Hmm.
others, withness. It's in dynamism with others. So even when you
Mhm.
ask people what your differentiating strengths are, what your superpowers, it's what matters in that dynamic between you and the person who's giving the answer.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Go for it. You were going to finish something? I
Uh,
thought.
so I was going to just say, yeah, the relating with bringing others along. I mean, we started Carol, our friend Carol, my student. Carol was the one who connected us, and Carol is authentic. And Carol was doing it because she. I mean, I remember when she wrote me, she's like, my friend Helena has this podcast. I believe in her so much. I'm like, well, because Carol believed in her. There was nothing in it for Carol except
Yeah.
that she said, you know what? I think this you'll find value and you could be helpful to each other. Carol is really authentic and
Mhm.
inspiring and wonderful. Hello, Carol. I hope you're listening to this podcast and hearing us talk about how great you are.
I want to loop back to the withness. I love that so much. A few years ago, I was listening to this podcast with Simon Sinek, and he says, "Why are our shelves filled with books on self realization and not other realization?" Whereas,
Yes.
the Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, where the top is self actualization. He was talking about how that should be a continuum, and I think you know Maslow himself realized in his own work that it wasn't capped at self-realization. Regardless, I think that's where a lot of us stay. And can you talk to us about why you came to advocating for that witness, why it's always in tandem, and why that's so important? Because I think that's truly, truly where we as a society, as a collective, can have an impact when we see things as togetherness and it's not just me oriented.
As an immigrant coming here at age 7, started realizing there were several things I learned. One is you can't assume anything because, for example, I first place I landed was South Jersey, and I was learning the word water, English. I didn't know a word of English, so I'm like water. Can I have a glass of water? And my classmates, like I was 7, they start laughing. It's like, it's not water, it's water. I'm like, okay, English is really weird, water. And then I came to another state and I said, can I have a glass of water? And they're like, what's water? It's water. A lot of times we're very stuck in our own assumptions. And I realized it's just a matter of what place you're in, that what people see and what they don't see, right? You try to have this open mind and say, oh, what
Hmm.
matters here? What doesn't? And when you're engaging with that, you're also getting a deeper sense of yourself. It's
Hmm.
when we learn a foreign language, that's when we get to understand the nuances of our own language even
Hmm.
more. So self awareness can be gained by reflection, but it can also be gained by engaging with others who are different, because then we
Hmm.
know what really is important. And so I love it when you said you're fearful, but you still go there because you're going out of your comfort zone, because that's where you learn so much about yourself. Two, I won't be where I am if it weren't for others who opened doors for me and who helped me. And they didn't need to. Those teachers to spend extra time with me to learn the language. Friends who just, I see kindness and goodness everywhere. It goes back to our very first part of our conversation. Yes, there's great inequity and injustice in the world, but I think most people don't wake up to say, I want to be a terrible person. And people are complicated, they're complex. Someone can do beautiful, kind things, they can also do terrible things. I can do very kind things. I will say no, most definitely done things I'm not proud of, right? But we're all the same person. So I think we look for the good in people and we celebrate that. We help them say, this is what you should do more of. Do more of.
Mhm.
And then having the
Mhm.
courage to say, this thing you did, it's not your best. You could do better. How can I help? I've been on other podcasts where I raised the idea of withness, but you're the one who's like, I know we're having a very different conversation than others I've had before.
I love it.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for that.
I'm very, very intrigued because a lot of things that you've said, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on, and I'm always looking to largen my arsenal of resources. What can I tap into when? And the
Yeah.
superpower one has always been very like I've always been very aware of that, and gratitude has been a key one, and like the otherness, like always being in tandem. That's given me a lot of safety, honestly, because I realize in a fearful situation, well, I'm never alone. If I see this world through
Yes.
togetherness, right, then I'm also never alone dealing with this challenge. And it takes the collective to solve a
Yes.
complex problem. It's not just the individual IQ and genius. You know what I mean? So that's given me a lot of comfort in my journey to overcome
It's hard.
challenges.
It's also recognizing what you bring to the
Hmm.
table that's different, right? You're not blending in with the collective. It's like the Marvel Universe heroes or DC Universe hero, depending on which set of heroes you like. Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman and Aquaman all have very different things they bring to the table. However, that team wouldn't be if they didn't bring fully those things that make them different to the table. Our society tends to be like, hey, Superman, great job flying, but look at Aquaman. You really should take swimming lessons. And I'm like, what?
Hmm.
That's be Superman. Let Aquaman be Aquaman and join us up as a team. That's the collective and the individual.
I love that. What a beautiful way to wrap this up. Also, everyone, if you don't know, Sanyin has an amazing newsletter with lots of invaluable gems in there. You can find and subscribe to her newsletter over LinkedIn. Are there other ways that they can find and connect with your amazing wisdom and knowledge and insights?
Thanks, Helena. Several ways. One is on LinkedIn. They can follow me on LinkedIn because that's where I just put out a lot of different little insights. I have a newsletter. There's the LinkedIn newsletter, but even more current is the Superpowers newsletter on Substack. And they can just look for Superpowers with Sanyin, Google Superpowers with Sanyin, Substack, and then subscribe to that newsletter because that's where like the most current is. I also have the launch book, which is available in print and audio form, which I did the recording and the recording is more updated and that's on audio. They can Google or on audibles, they can find the launch book and you can start seeing the inklings of witness and superpowers in there because there's an entire chapter on you have to build your tribe, right? Doing it with others. And then I will have a YouTube channel soon too with short videos.
Yay. Perfect. I'm excited for that to come. Um, Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing so authentically and just for trusting me to go on this journey and
Oh,
answer, have a conversation with me about these things.
but you're so
Enjoyed it.
thoughtful and you're so authentic. And I love this conversation. You asked me questions I haven't thought about before. And as a result, we landed on this idea of connecting with others. And I love that. I can't wait to get a copy of this podcast because I'm now working on the Superpowers book. And I think some of this will make its way into there.